Hey everybody, my name is Jared and I am a Master Mason in the state of Mississippi in the United States of America. Still here in the third section of the Entered Apprentice lecture, we're going to get into something that's a bit interesting because it has, depending on who you ask, several different possible explanations for why it's there and why it is the way that it is. So, this is who lodges are dedicated to and why. Here in the state of Mississippi, it reads, "Our ancient brethren dedicated their lodges to King Solomon, because he was our first most excellent Grand Master. We dedicate ours to St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist, who were two eminent patrons of Masonry, and since their time there is represented in every regular and well-governed lodge a certain point within a circle, embordered by two perpendicular parallel lines, representing St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist, and upon the top rests the Holy Scriptures. The point represents an individual brother. The circle is the boundary line beyond which he is never to suffer his passions or prejudices to betray him. In going round this circle, we necessarily touch these two lines, as well as the Holy Scriptures, and while a Mason keeps himself circumscribed within their precepts, it is impossible that he should materially err." Now, depending on who you ask, there are people who will adamantly adhere to the legend of Freemasonry as a physical, literal truth, that Freemasonry and the lodges as we know them now existed back in the days of King Solomon, and others will argue that they were well before that, even to the creation of man. But what we have on paper and what we're able to deduce in a more scholarly type fashion tells us that chances are these are legends, things that we're able to use to convey a message, stories that we are familiar with, that we already have a certain level of camaraderie with, if you will. We already have lessons that are speaking to us from these lessons, and we can use them to explain something else or something further. But whatever your personal feelings are towards that, the point for this section is that the lodges are dedicated to St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist, or as you may usually hear it said in the lodge, the Holy Saints John. But before we talk about them, perhaps the more interesting thing here is the symbol that is being explained. It starts a point within the circle, and then two parallel yet somehow also perpendicular lines, that on the top of which rests the Holy Scriptures. Now we get a little bit of an explanation of this in what I've already read, but here in Mississippi we get a little extra explanation that's not part of the lecture. It's just printed in the lecture book, and it reads, "The circle was the astrological and afterward the astronomical symbol of the sun. As the sun was the source of a physical light and became the object of worship, so its sign became the symbol of the source of intellectual and spiritual light, the only true and living God, the object of our labor in life and our rewards hereafter. The point was the focus of light and the especial symbol of deity. As man was made in the image of God, in a lesser sense it also represents the individual brother. The parallels are the summer and winter solstices, the sun's stopping places, which the sun in its apparent yearly journeys north and south never passes or goes beyond. They symbolize the lines of moral rectitude. The circle supports the book to indicate its divine origin and inspiration, and that it rests upon and is supported by divinity itself." So this is one of the explanations that you tend to hear when discussing this symbol of the parallel lines and the point within a circle. and you can understand where this symbolism would come from. Generally, the picture is displayed like this, with the parallel lines being vertical. But if we lay it on its horizontal and make the circle as if it were the Earth, then we can see how as the Earth tilts, we get the summer and winter solstices. Now, to take this back a bit further, I've always been intrigued about how as religion and belief progresses in humanity, we do still keep a firm foundation in what we see in nature. And Freemasonry is no different in that regard. So we personally as humans, to the best of our knowledge, have no way of changing how the earth tilts and how it spins, and thereby somehow affect where the solstices would occur on the calendar that we invented. Okay? But it always happens. And because of the calendar being developed, generally speaking, around the moon and the sun, then solstices generally occur at the same time every single year. Sometimes off by a day or two, but that's over a course of time. But because of that, we then turn around and see all sorts of events in humanity being celebrated around those occasions, including in Christian-based religions, the celebration of St. John the Baptist and the celebration of St. John the Evangelist, which is separated in just that way as you would find them in a calendar. St. John the Baptist is in June, and St. John the Evangelist is celebrated at the winter solstice in late December. So we're celebrating these two people on these two particular days, really only because it's a memorable event. It's something that we know is going to occur every single year. We can bank on it, and so we choose to honor very special people on a very special day. The time where the sun is at its longest during the day, and a time when the sun is at its least during the day. Here in the state of Mississippi, we specifically celebrate St. John the Baptist Day and St. John the Evangelist Day Masonically in a couple different ways. They're very particular times that we schedule several different things around or on. So for example, in the template for the bylaws of a subordinate lodge, you can see here that we're talking about stated monthly meetings, and also on the anniversary of St. John the Baptist and on St. John the Evangelist. And because those do change, we have some specific dates that we can make sure are standard throughout the state for every single year. So we're telling subordinate lodges that these are two dates that they are supposed to meet on. We are also told over in this section that there are two Masonic festivals, St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist, and that every lodge should unite on the celebration of at least one of these great festivals of the fraternity. Now here locally in my district where my lodge is, we pretty much always guaranteed to meet on St. John the Evangelist Day for a reason I'll mention in just a second. But my lodge specifically takes the time to also make sure we have a bit of a fellowship. It's usually just a picnic out at our lodge on St. John the Baptist Day as well, or on the weekend close to it. So going back to St. John the Evangelist Day, you see over in this section regarding the election and appointment of officers that the election should take place in the meeting before St. John the Evangelist Day, and that in all instances, all officers of the lodge shall be installed on that festival or as soon thereafter as practical. So here in my jurisdiction, most of the local lodges get together and we do a joint officer installation, and it's done either on St. John the Evangelist Day or a day very close thereafter. So say for example St. John the Evangelist Day happens to fall on a Sunday, then we'll probably do it the next Monday or something to that effect. But it's always done directly after and as soon as possible to St. John the Evangelist Day. So those are kind of the things that you see here in Mississippi on how the events, the Masonic events, kind of rotate around those two important days. But we could talk for hours about everything else that's celebrated around those times. But is that really the reason why. Is that really why St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist are there? Could we not have found other people to represent that might have spoken more to Freemasonry? Well, in case you've never gone back and looked at the scriptures and tried to understand a little bit more about why the Holy Saints John would be the ones that are a part of this and why we dedicate our lodges to them, we're going to have to go back to scripture for some references. So on the surface, you might think that it seems pretty obvious that both John the Baptist and John the Evangelist would have some importance to Christians. Obviously, the baptism of Jesus Christ and the Apostle John being out there and proselyting the church seem to be very important and prominent people. But why them? I mean, there's so many other important people that are represented in the Bible. Why not someone else? Well, we can kind of start to get a little sense for that digging down in the scriptures. For example, over in the Gospel of Matthew, we can read, "Verily I say unto you, among them that are born of women, there hath not risen a greater than John the Baptist." So those are obviously some pretty powerful words. We have the written word of Jesus Christ saying that of all men, none were greater than John the Baptist. So it ought to immediately capture the mind of a Christian on just how important John the Baptist ought to be. So if we stop right there, rather than exploring all the other scriptures that might be relevant, just for the sake of brevity, and switch things over to John the Evangelist, all we need to do is go straight to the Gospel of John, and from the beginning we can read, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was him. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehendeth it not." Well, I don't need to get into any sort of the ritual of Freemasonry. Anybody who's interested in Freemasonry understands the comparison that is constantly made between darkness and light, without knowledge and with knowledge. And here we can see in the Gospel of John that very stark combination being made. "And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not." So pretty interesting things. But to go a step further and not just rely on a couple passages of scripture, let's talk a little bit about the morality of these two men. We know in Freemasonry that morality plays a very big part of the teachings. So with John the Baptist, we can remember about him being captured and imprisoned and eventually killed by King Herod, all the while still professing Christ and never denying him. So he stayed true to his word and kept his loyalty, and ultimately even at the sacrifice of his own life. Over with St. John the Evangelist, we don't have any record of him having to suffer a death for his convictions, but we do have multiple references throughout scriptures as him being the most loyal apostle that Christ chose. And we even have references to things like Jesus trusting the care of his mother to him after he died, and other things like that that speak very much to Freemasons about his moral conduct. So, in this sense, we can see how these two men are parallels. And so I think that is maybe a little bit more of the way I would go if I were explaining to somebody who asked me what do these two parallel lines really represent. Don't get me wrong, the astronomical things really do speak to me as well, and I think that there's a lot of foundational stuff there, because without that we would have never progressed to what this symbol means with this explanation. But there you have it. So now I want to touch on something I find peculiar. I did a little bit of research trying to understand this before bringing my explanation to you, and I was unsuccessful in finding an explanation. So the wording in this is two perpendicular parallel lines. Well, I can't even remember what grade they taught us about parallel lines in school, but I don't know how you're supposed to have two lines be perpendicular and be parallel at the same time. And interestingly, I've never had anybody ask me that question in doing studying as well. They happily learn that line and never say, wait a second, how does that happen? Well, I got two theories I'd like to toss out there, and you tell me what sort of lessons are taught to you or taught in your jurisdiction down below. So perpendicular lines are two lines that intersect and form a 90-degree angle, so a square. Very common in Freemasonry, and everybody understands the square. So we can maybe think about this as a two-part thing. So we're describing maybe two different sets of lines, and it's not really quite displayed in the symbol that is drawn. But if you look at these men as being two parallels in being moral and loyal and true to the end and all of those kind of things, but also perpendicular, being square and virtuous and everything that is associated with that emblem. So perhaps that's one explanation, that these men embody those two different types of symbols. Another one I think of is very similar to that, but thinking about how could you have perpendicular and parallel lines at the exact same time? Well, every time we see this image, it's drawn on a flat page. It's two-dimensional. Whether we see it on a screen or on a piece of paper, it's just two lines parallel on a flat surface. But what if we remember that these lines are representing two men, and if we had these two men standing next to each other and physically representing this, they would be standing upright perpendicular to the earth. So to me, I like that symbology. It means something to me. I don't know if that bag holds any water, but you tell me what you think. We extend that by several different things in Freemasonry throughout our learnings about standing tall and being just and upright. So I can see how the image of the Saints John standing upright parallel to each other could be two perpendicular parallel lines. So anyway, those are my thoughts on that, and you let me know below again what lessons you've learned and how this symbol, if it's even used in your jurisdiction, how it is explained where you are. One final note here, I didn't really cover the Holy Scriptures. There is an attempt to explain that in our book, but quite honestly, if you have a point and one parallel line and know that that's going to be the radius of your compass, and you draw a circle, you don't have to have another parallel line nor something on the other tangent. You just need one tangent and you can draw that circle and be done with it. So really the explanation's not quite there for me as given in the Blue Book, but what we can take from this is understanding that if we have this border that's going to circumscribe our passions, what does that border really, what is it really composed of? And so I think if we look at it from that point and say, okay, well, on this border it's composed by the principles of St. John the Baptist, and on this border it's composed of the principles of St. John the Evangelist, and on this border it's composed of the Holy Scriptures themselves. I think that, to me, it gives us those understandings to know, okay, well, I know there's supposed to be a border that I'm not supposed to pass, but what are the rules? Where is that line in the sand? And if we can think about those tenets and principles that are given in the Scriptures or by those men, then we can find that border and know never to pass it. So thank you all so much for taking the time to watch. We'll come back next time and get a little bit further into the Entered Apprentice lecture, the third section. We're nowhere near done. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.